morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let me say from the outset that Zimbabwe is a failed state and buffoons, self-righteous buffoons like VP Chiwenga knows that Zimbabwe's so-called Vision 2030 is a mirage. God knows the nation has been chasing this mirage for the last 45 years to fail to see the mirage for what it is. Starting from the days of Mugabe's Kutsarushinji, scientific socialism, mass prosperity that turned into mass poverty. I would like also to emphasize that Chiwenga will never stamp out corruption because he himself cannot pass a lifestyle audit. He's just as corrupt as his colleagues in ZANU-PF. That is the tragedy in Zimbabwe. Yesterday, he was at a funeral at Heroes Eka, and he gave the usual self-righteous speech promising to end Zimbabwe's economic meltdown. What is interesting here is underlining Zimbabwe's precarious position, where those who are responsible for the country's mess have the audacity to claim that they and they alone know the way out.
What legacy are we creating? One of sacrifice, patriotic service, and national purpose, or one of plunder? Ladies and gentlemen, the liberation struggle was not waged so that a few could prosper while men remain in abject poverty. It was fought so that every Zimbabwean could walk in dignity and economically empowered. Our duty is not to merely honor their memory. It is to implement their vision through ethical leadership, clean governance, unity of purpose, and economic transformation. Therefore, his enduring aspiration was to see that same stability, prosperity, and national cohesion firmly established in his own country, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived reality for every citizen. We need to take note of significant progress under National Development Strategy 1 and NDS 1 as we transition into National Development Strategy 2. Defeat corruption and uphold a whole of government approach, realizing our vision of becoming an upper middle income society by 2030 hinges on our collective commitment to ethical behavior and the rejection of selfish enrichment practices.
You don't have to listen to any more of that. Many Zimbabweans know that is just empty rhetoric. They've heard it so many times. The tragedy with Zimbabwe is we have corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical thugs who are in government because they believe they have the divine right to rule the country by virtue that they spearheaded the armed struggle. This has been Zimbabwe's case. In 1980, when the country gained its independence, it was very difficult, of course, for the nation to resist ZANU-PF's overtures to impose a de facto one-party state. It would be foolhardy for an ordinary civilian to argue looking up the business end of an AK-47 rifle. During the campaign in 1980, ZANU-PF was supposed to withdraw all its operatives from the field. They did not. The freedom fighters who remained in the field during the campaign period made it very clear that in those areas where ZANU-PF, ZANLA forces had been dominant, and that is a good percentage of Zimbabwe's rural areas, there were no-go areas for the opposition. And for the ordinary people, they were told in no uncertain terms, if ZANU-PF does not win the election, the Bush War would continue. Of course, the people voted to end the Bush War, not knowing that by losing their right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country, they were not losing it only in 1980. They were losing it forever. Because ZANU-PF went on to set a de facto one-party state that has ruled the country to this day. I think it would be amiss to pretend that the country did not have the opportunity to end the de facto one-party state. It did. The best chance we had was during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. But Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends who were entrusted the task of implementing the democratic reforms. He bribed them with the trappings of high office, the E-class Mercedes-Benz, for all the deputy ministers, the two deputy prime ministers, and Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the very generous salaries and allowances for all the incoming MDC, councillors, and MPs and senators. And for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the $4 million mansion in Highlands. MDC leaders forgot about the reforms. And the opportunity to change, to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship was lost. That is the reality in Zimbabwe. As for the economic, there is no doubt that we have failed to achieve any meaningful economic change in Zimbabwe. VP Chiwenga was talking of Vision 2030, upper middle income status. That is just nonsense, and he knows it. Here is a South African political analyst and author giving an analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe.
You go to Zimbabwe today, you want to cry when you see how black people in Zimbabwe are living. Number one, water as we speak is not reticulated. So you drink it at your own risk. Number two, Zimbabweans get electricity from midnight to 5 o'clock in the morning. The whole day they have no electricity. Number three, Mugabe himself died in Singapore. There's no single hospital that could heal him, that could treat him in Zimbabwe. The education system has collapsed. In South Africa, it is estimated that we have more than 7 million Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans are scattered all over the world as we speak. Who caused all this mayhem, this suffering? They talk about land reform. Zimbabwe's land reform is a mess. As you and I speak now, Zimbabwe imports maize, which is the staple food of the people of Zimbabwe. The country cannot produce food for itself.
That is the economic and political reality in Zimbabwe. Chiwenga is just a self-righteous buffoon. As much as he wants to pretend that he can transform the country, the truth of the matter is, even after 45 years in power, he doesn't even know what the solution is. Because he doesn't know what the problem is. And the problem for Zimbabwe is that the nation has been ruled these last 45 years by self-righteous buffoons who think they have the divine right to rule. And they cannot be held to account by anybody. So now we are caught up in this situation where the individuals who are the problem are insisting that they are the solution too. They are not the solution. They have never been the solution. The truth of the matter is, if we are serious about solving Zimbabwe's problem, we have got to address it at the very core. We have got to acknowledge that our ZANU-PF friends are the problem. That our failure to hold free, fair, and credible election is the problem. But how do you get there when ZANU-PF itself will never reform itself out of office? That much should be understood by everyone. ZANU-PF will never reform itself out of office. So what do we do? This question was asked in the late 1990s, when it became clear that ZANU-PF was rigging the elections and will stay in power by virtue of denying people a meaningful say in the governance of the country. The decision by the nation then was, we can either take up arms again and fight the regime to restore all the fundamental freedoms and human rights to all Zimbabweans, as we did during the Liberation War, before ZANU-PF hijacked the whole thing for their own selfish purpose. Or we should elect opposition leaders whose number one task would be to implement the democratic reforms and end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. The people elected the second. And so a big wave of democratic change, demand for democratic change, swept the nation. Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends launched their party on the crust of that wave. And they even named their party the Movement for Democratic Change, promising the nation they would deliver the democratic change the nation was dying for. The tragic reality is they did have the opportunity to implement those reforms. Much more so during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. They failed to implement even one reform because Mugabe bribed them. 25 years down the line since MDC, CCC leaders have been on the political platform, it should have dawned to the people of Zimbabwe that MDC, CCC leaders have sold out. We need to wake up to that reality. Whether some people want to admit it or not, the truth of the matter remains that MDC, CCC leaders have sold out. That is the reality. We cannot run away from it. They had 25 years, including the 5 years in the GNU, to implement the reforms. They failed to implement even one token reform. Worse still, since the GNU debacle, they are the ones who have been conning people to participate in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they'll be changing nothing. All they'll be doing is give the process legitimacy and giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. Why? Because ZANU-PF corrupted them. The GNU taught MDC leaders that if they cooperate with ZANU-PF, they will have a share of the spoils of power, a few gravity seats. And this is all that the opposition leaders have been fighting for all these years. The tragedy is the people ourselves have been slow to realize what has been happening here. Some of the opposition leaders, like David Coulthard, they've admitted it. In his book, David Coulthard did not make it a secret. He made it abundantly clear that the election process in Zimbabwe without reforms is so flawed, so illegal, the only logical thing to do is to stop participating. But he himself admits that they have been participating because they were also after the few gravitran seats on offer. They couldn't resist that. Our problem is we, the ordinary people, have been slow to realize what is going on here. We need to wake up. Chiwenga and his fellow ZANU-PF buffoons will never change anything. Chiwenga wants to come back now and pretend he's the champion. He's going to stamp out corruption. He's going to deliver Vision 2030. This is all nonsense because we all know that he himself will never pass a lifestyle audit. He has amassed a lot of wealth through corruption. He's just as corrupt as all the other ZANU-PF leaders are. He will never allow free, fair, and credible elections. And so will perpetuate the de facto one-party state dictatorship. And as for the opposition, they will continue, and indeed some of them are already out in the field campaigning to con people to participate in flawed 2028 elections, which if people do participate, they will give the process legitimacy. And we'll be back to where we are now. The fight is on. The people have to wake up to the reality that MDC-CCC as ZANU-PF Team B in all but name, fighting for Team A to win and for Team A to have legitimacy. And as for our friends in ZANU-PF, after 45 years of telling people, promising people economic prosperity, I think it's an insult to think that people will continue to believe that mirage when they can see with their own eyes that Zimbabwe is in economic ruin. And the country will continue to sink into the abyss as long as we continue to have a regime of thugs who believe they have the divine right to rule the country. To VP Chiwenga and his ZANU-PF colleagues, ask yourself who voted you into office. Because the 2023 elections were rigged. SADC, the AU election observers, made it very clear that those elections were flawed. We have to end this madness. Our biggest problem is that we have a problem of those who landed us into this mess, and yet they believe they are the solution. We would not be in this mess if you knew what you were doing. You are the problem. You cannot be the solution too. Think about it.